there is a lot of videos on the internet which explain how to study or do tasks, but I wanted to make a video addressing how you actually get to the point where you feel motivated to actually do any of this stuff.
You can organize your entire life by following these 28 really simple steps, running a marathon, meditating for 20 minutes a day.
Okay, yeah, but how do I actually get motivated to do any of those things? Unbelievably, I am a law student at the London School of Economics. Welcome to whatever this is. In terms of keeping to a work schedule, starting and maintaining habits, and just getting stuff done in general, these are my best tips for getting motivated and then staying motivated to do whatever you want to do. I'll be leaving timestamps in the description so you can skip to any part of the video which you find most helpful. Let's get it. Okay, we've had a quick location change, but don't worry about it. Step 1 is priority setting. Often, especially if you're trying to start a new habit, you have this fleeting moment of like, do you know what, mate? I'm gonna learn French. I'm gonna start going to the gym. Yeah, I think I'm gonna learn to code, only to find like maybe 2 days later, you just can't be asked anymore. You will have forgotten all about your new aim by like the end of the week. One of the most important things, I believe, is to actively consider and have an actual physical list of priorities. Actively setting your priorities in life overall is crucial because it sets out your game plan and it frames what stuff is important to you and where you want to put your energy. For example, during term, my priorities were studying, seeing friends, running my podcast, playing ultimate frisbee, a research project with my uni, and looking for internships. By naming and ordering all the components of my life in order of priority. So studying my law degree is number 1. Therefore, this is my first priority. And so most of my energy goes toward this. But if there was ever a clash between this and any of my other priorities, I would know in my head which is more important to me. It's really useful to know how you're ranking the different parts of your life, which is more important to you and which comes first when they ever meet each other. You decide what's important to you. You can say exactly what things you want to be focusing on. I genuinely recommend everyone make one of these lists for your life right now. You can always reset them when your life changes a bit or your priorities change. Sit down and write down everything that you generally spend your time doing, as well as stuff that you'd like to be doing but you're not doing yet. Then make an active decision. What's actually important to you? Where do you actually want your energy and focus to go? Then draw the 2 lists together and make a list of what your priorities are going to be. Try and make sure that this list is no longer than like 5, because otherwise it just gets a bit too heavy. For example, and this is where learning new habits comes in as well, for my summer I've set myself 5 priorities or goals, and these are putting effort into my role in a startup which I'm working at, working on this YouTube channel, learning 5 minutes of Japanese on Duolingo a day for an entire year, kitting out my bongo, which is this van, with equipment so that I can live in it, and fully plan my own law tutoring project that I'm launching later this year. And that's literally it. That's it. By setting these down and having them written and knowing exactly what they are, you can resolve exactly what stuff you want to focus on in your life overall. That way you frame your focus, which I think makes it much harder to fall off track. It's definitely much easier to fall off track if you just don't have a clear idea of exactly what your priorities are. So yeah, that's step number 1. Set your priorities before you start. Get them down, decide what they are, and get them in a Google Doc or on a note, because you can't even start before you got those down, I'm telling you. Step 2 is motivation to discipline. There is a diagram I use which I think is really useful for understanding the life cycle of a successful habit or just a regular task that you're doing consistently, like studying. It works on this continuum. You start with motivation. Let's use a metaphor of running. I decide I'm gonna start running and I'm pumped. I'm excited and I'm gassed about this new habit. I do the first day or 2 if I'm really feeling it. This is feeling motivated, which is an emotionally driven state, where you have an inclination to do something because you feel as though you want to do it. This is a common understanding. When you're motivated to do something, on an emotional level, you're pumped to do it. You're like, oh, hell yeah, let's go. After a few days though, the hype wears off, and getting up and going running just feels far less appealing. And you've hit this wall where you're no longer motivated to do the habit anymore. You'd rather flake or not get round to it or forget. However, if you're on a path to creating a successful habit, habit, this is where discipline takes over. Discipline is not an emotionally driven state, but instead a cognitively driven one. You don't actually feel excited or pumped up to go on this run, but your mental cognitive part of your brain tells you to stick to it and do the run anyway. Even though you don't feel like it or you feel neutrally about it, the cognitive part of your brain still makes you go on that run. Step 3 is getting to flow. Once you've been kick-started by motivation, then you have been disciplined enough over a period of time, eventually you arrive at this sweet spot where now you just go running. You don't hate it and you actually kind of like it, but you just go running every day on this kind of autopilot that doesn't require much effort. This is where the habit is finally stuck. When a habit is lodged, you are driven both emotionally and cognitively to do a task, which is otherwise known as flow. This is where you're entirely locked in, both cognitively and emotionally, and you can do the task consistently without much resistance and with full focus. I believe that this passage of stages kind of applies to any habit you're wanting to try and begin, stick to, and embed into your routine. This can be running, studying consistently, literally anything that you want to learn or do. If you can work your way through the motivation stage and the discipline stage, then you arrive at this flow stage. So the remaining question is, how do you actually get through the motivation and discipline stages? That's what we're going to talk about. One thing to add is that the passage of these stages also fits together with the priorities list. A habit is never going to stick if you haven't told yourself mentally that this is something that you really want. That is why the priority stage is also really important, because without kind of resolving with yourself what you want to try and pursue in your life or at the moment in your life, then it's going to be really difficult to get through these stages. So make sure that you definitely make those priorities first so you know which habits you're actually wanting to embed into your life. Step 4 is motivation to start. How can you actually get yourself emotionally invested enough and kickstart yourself into starting a habit or starting studying or exercising or literally anything? There are 2 things which I think can really help here. The first is chunking. Say you're looking at an essay or the prospect of running or literally any habit, and you look at the thing you want to do and you think to yourself, it's too goddamn big, it's too thick, and you encounter this sort of emotional resistance. It just feels too daunting. Here's a carrot. I'm looking at this carrot and I'm thinking, damn, I can't eat that carrot all in one go. This is too big. Like, no way. Therefore, I'm not even gonna try. I'm not even gonna begin. But if I just slice the carrot into bite-sized chunks, it suddenly becomes way more plausible that I can eat this entire carrot, as beginning to eat it is now far more doable. You can do this with any task. Say I'm trying to write an essay. To feel motivated to begin this huge task, I'm not going to look at it as one big task, but instead lots of little carrot chunks. So the first chunk would be reading my notes, the second chunk would be doing the first reading, fourth chunk would be making a plan, the fifth chunk would be writing the introduction, and so on. Breaking something up into bite-sized chunks makes it far more easy to find the motivation to begin doing the task in the first place. The second tip is tackling perfectionism. This links to chunking in the sense that if you set the task into smaller chunks, the pressure of doing things well or even perfectly diminishes massively. Nevertheless, I think having the expectation to be good or even excellent can cripple us and prevent us from starting in the first place. A good mental trick on this front is visualizing a bar of your expectations. If you set the bar above you and it's something you're trying to reach or attain, then this can create a mindset where you're going to feel anxious about underachieving and be discouraged or resistant to trying or starting something. However, if you start a task and visualize this bar of expectation below your feet as a floor which you're standing on, this means you've set your expectations low, but it doesn't mean that you've set yourself up to perform poorly. It just means that you're not expecting a high standard of yourself, but you're still going to try and do your very best without having this anxiety about meeting your own expectations. Visualizing it like this just means that you're going to feel less resistance and less anxious, because with no expectations, you have nothing to lose. I can't remember the quote exactly, but I remember in a Tim Ferriss podcast, he says something along the lines of, you need to expect your first attempt to be bad, otherwise you'll never be able to begin. Step 5 is discipline to continue. Once you've begun a task or a habit, how can you keep yourself cognitively dedicated to doing it, even where you don't feel like doing it. I think this is the most difficult stage. Overcoming the sheer force of can't be asked is really difficult. We're going to look at 3 mental tricks you can use, which then translate into practical steps, which I think are useful for maintaining discipline. The first is turning off notifications. In order to focus on one task, this necessitates a focal point which excludes all other tasks or stimuli. This translates into a pretty straightforward practical step, which is getting into a distraction-free environment. Your phone and social media are the most toxic culprits here. So unless the task involves your phone somehow, get it on airplane mode, get it out of sight, preferably out of the room that you're working in. If you need to use your laptop, you can use this Chrome extension called Block Site to block out Twitter or YouTube or whatever your weak point is while you're working. This really helps. The second step is mental contracting. This can be a really powerful mental tool. In my head, whenever I've resolved to do a task or work on something, I treat it as though I've made a contract with myself. In my head, I make this concrete commitment, which I then don't even give myself room to question or flake on because I'm under a contract with myself. It's almost like you're on a contract for a job. You can't just not turn up because you can't be asked one day. Framing it in this way means that you can use the weight of your own commitment against yourself, so you feel like getting something done is just mandatory. You don't have an option or a choice because you haven't made a choice available to yourself. This translates into the practical step of making to-do lists. I literally run my entire life off to-do lists, and they are useful in so many different ways, but here they reinforce this mental contract with yourself because you can see what you need to do written down, and you feel sort of obligated to power through them and then tick them off for this sense of achievement almost. So yeah, mental contracting, probably the most useful thing I use in my brain, and to-do lists as well. Honestly, you're making contracts with yourself every time you try and do a task. That's the best way to look at it in my opinion. The third tip is sim stacking. I don't know if you guys have ever played The Sims. If you haven't, what happens in The Sims, if you're hanging out and controlling your sim characters in the game, you do so by setting them lists of tasks and actions. The tasks you set the sim kind of stack up into these like action stacks. This might be really weird, but when I'm struggling to find the discipline to do things, I put myself in the third person and I imagine that I'm a sim character that I'm controlling. In my head, I stack up a chain of tasks for myself to do. And then basically I just work through those tasks in order. In fact, when I'm procrastinating, I just imagine how annoying that is for the person playing the game. You've set your sim character all these tasks and they're just slumped on the sofa on the Instagram Explore page, not doing any of them. It must be infuriating. So I do it for myself, but I try and plow through these tasks as if I'm a sim character. Super weird, but I find it really helpful. As a practical step, this can translate into task chains. This is where you attach one task to another. So you just feel like you're running off a chain of commands for yourself. For example, if you're trying to learn a language, you could attach this so that you do it directly after you've eaten your breakfast, which is something you do every day automatically. This makes it much easier to remember because you attach it to a task that you do consistently anyway. So for example, I spend 15 minutes on Duolingo learning Japanese after breakfast every single day. Because I've attached it to breakfast, I'm far less likely to forget this task on a day-to-day basis. Another example would be if I wanted to start working out every day, which I'm not doing at the moment. I could set this as something I do before I brush my teeth in the evening. So when I go to brush my teeth, I think, oh wait, I need to do some squats first. This also links to-do lists, I guess, because I just power through the list as if it were a list of commands for me. Like I'm just running on a script. I know this tip is slightly strange, but I find it really, really helpful for me when I'm trying to like discipline myself into doing a certain task or embedding a habit on an everyday basis. So hopefully some of these tips can help you decide and commit to what you want to be doing, finding the motivation to start doing it, and then maintaining the discipline to keep doing it, and achieve a state of flow with the task, and overcome the human resistance to getting one's shit together. I hope this video was at least somewhat helpful, and see you soon. Stay safe.